Crystal Schaefer, Senior Moderator from Harvard Business Publishing, with 5 essentials in under 20 minutes on virtual teaming. About 20 years ago, a personal health issue forced me abruptly into the world of virtual work. I've been working this way almost exclusively ever since. If you are now leading or taking part in virtual teaming, there's a lot of advice out there, most of it really good. But some of it is based on more ideal conditions where we have the time to plan for it and can manage it systematically. Today's session is short and practically focused on virtual teaming even when conditions aren't ideal, as was the case for me many years ago and might be for you today. It combines real-world insight from virtual workers like me with the advice of our best experts from the HBS family, highlighting 5 key lessons to help you foster effective virtual teaming. At the end, you'll also find some additional resources for more info and access to more support. So, our first lesson, set the guardrails. Well, what do we mean here? Writing recently for HBR, Professor Ron J. Gulati at HBS noted that leaders know they need to give people room to be their best, to pursue unconventional ideas, and to make smart decisions in the moment. But here's the problem. Executives have trouble resolving the tension between employee empowerment and operational discipline. But guidelines are not the death of freedom if they're well designed and well implemented. Leaders who've made this basic but counterintuitive discovery have essentially cultivated freedom within a framework, embedding the organization's purpose, priorities, and principles in a living set of guidelines. So virtual work can be inherently freeing, but to be effective, it needs a framework. So the first step in virtual teaming is to establish those guardrails that are ultimately going to help you to manage that freedom. Clarity and consistency are the first step in the guardrail process. If you're a leader, it's up to you to set the tone and establish some non-negotiables. But it works best to let everyone in the team have a voice and contribute to setting those norms. So you want to work together to document them with your team. How do you get started? Well, first thing is to ask. Here are some questions that you can consider with your team. What are your expectations going to be around response times? How often should we get together? How often should we make ourselves available to others? Will we have set office hours in the virtual universe? How might we respect different time zones and or make all of those time zones work to our collective advantage? What protocols will we use during our virtual meetings? What's our reason for being, our team motto? Will we advertise a superpower? All of these things will enable you to establish an identity for your virtual work and to ensure that you're working together effectively. Now, creating this set of agreed-upon norms together and establishing the protocols for sticking to them creates those guardrails, but try not to establish anything you can't really live with in practice. And if you as a leader know you're going to break protocol, don't expect anyone to hold to it either. When you set them up, try to be as realistic as possible and allow space for everyone. Now, important part, get the tech right. Obviously, the nuts and bolts of your remote technology matter. And in a perfect world with time and resources available, you'd want to choose technology that's reliable and outfit everyone with uniform hardware, software, and platforms. That being said, we're not in a perfect world right now. And you may want to lean in on some of the technologies that you already have available and some of those that everyone is comfortable using. And that's okay. Obviously, under ideal conditions, we'd spend a lot more time right now talking about specifics of good tech, and every virtual worker has favorites and go-tos. But right now, your tech may just be what it is, and it may be different tech for different folks. Everyone may be working with something that's just different right now, and your biggest task is to make the mix that you have available work. We may not be able to control specifics, but we can still think about what we have and use the mix the best way we can. So the first step is to do an audit with your team about what everybody has and what's easily available for everyone to access. There are many companies now making free use of technology available, extending their opportunity for you to download assets for free. All of this is making it a little bit easier to access a wider variety of technologies. And this is important. because research from Harvard Business School professor Sadal Neely tells us that technologies that enable most distributed work, the ones we're used to, the ones we use to all the time, like email, groupware, chat, Slack, they don't transmit sufficient cues, and they can create conflict. They are, in a sense, more informationally rich, but relationally lean. And to the extent that you're able, it will help to avoid miscues and misinterpretation on your team if you can widen your mix and match the message or task with your medium, leveraging a broader range of technologies. For example, if you have to share information that's complex or personal, it's important to observe body language, hear tone and reflection, and be able to see some of what you're talking about. For these purposes, video and web conferencing services, those are the best options for you. If you're used to meeting face-to-face, you may want to lean in on these technologies a little bit more. If you're already used to working virtually, given the environment we're in right now, you may also want to lean in those technologies a little bit more. At the other end of the spectrum, small, non-urgent requests are best suited to email, instant messaging, or all-in-one platforms like Slack. So think about the team's comfort level with each of those and try to choose a mix that everyone is comfortable with. Although it might seem obvious, many people instinctively default to the preferred method of communication, particularly when they're stressed, and some people might be right now. So please make sure with your team that everyone is agreeing to those protocols. That goes back to our guardrails, and the technology follows those guidelines. To sum it up, pretty simple. If you can, secure access to high-quality uniform resources. If you can't, avoid tech shaming for people who might not be comfortable using the latest gadgets or might have in their home office a less than standard-of-the-art technology. To the best of your ability, a shared mix of technologies that cuts across that spectrum from lean to rich, and work it the best way you can to match your medium with the task or the message. Now, lessons 3 and 4 are fundamentally connected. Creating the space refers to a number of different things. It encompasses several dimensions of good virtual teaming. At the individual level, there's a simple element of really just creating space to work in. Now, you want to encourage and support everyone on the team to create some dedicated space for work. A room with a door, a desk, a chair, and good Wi-Fi are all ideal. Right now, though, minimum basic standards might differ for some of our colleagues, and that's okay. Encourage everyone to create their own work boundary, however small or even symbolic. I have a colleague that's working at her kitchen table right now, but she's created a cardboard placard that she puts up when she starts working that sets her boundaries and communicates to her family that the space is off limits. Space creation is more than physical, however. It's also about respect for one another's time. It can be tempting on virtual teams to stretch our workday to 24/7 because we can. Remember those guardrails in Lesson 1. They apply here too. Additionally, frequency of communication matters. Providing regular updates, responding to messages promptly, and being available at important times, especially when colleagues are located in different time zones, reduces the likelihood of roadblocks, and it can help to build trust. At the start, you probably can't communicate too much, but after the team gets in a rhythm, the ding of the inbox feels a little like insects at a picnic. If you're the leader, check in with your team on this too, and make it okay for them to let you know when less might be more, and recognize that threshold might be different for everyone. Ultimately, you can support your team best by recognizing every situation is different, role modeling some virtual work rituals, communicating more than you think you need to at the start, and checking in without micromanaging continually. Creating the space is part one, but at the same time, as much as we want to create space and observe those guardrails, we also need to bridge forms of distance that exist in virtual work. There are multiple kinds of distance involved in virtual teaming. There's physical time and place distance, operational distance, which refers to things like our team size, our bandwidth, skills, comfort with remote work, access to remote tools. And then there's a third kind of distance, and this one looms the largest. It's called affinity or social distance. And this refers to things like values, trust, interdependency, hierarchy, and social connection. Research shows that the best way for managers to drive performance of virtual teams is to focus on reducing the social distance first, and the physical and operational follow on from there. Professor Sadal Neely, again from HBS, has a number of suggestions for us as we think about bridging our efforts in 5 areas, and she refers to a framework for doing so as SPLIT. The S in SPLIT refers to structure. So with virtual teaming, we want to pay attention to the configuration of our calls and the ritual of our meetings. Think back to those guardrails in Lesson 1. Do people with status speak first? Are we reinforcing some us versus them attitudes on our team, or are we working to break them down? If we have a dispersed team already, do we hold calls at times that favor certain groups over others? Seemingly little things, again, can loom large. So pay attention to how you've structured every part of your virtual interaction. Process is equally as important, and that's the P in the SPLIT framework. So again, go back to the guardrails and just make sure you're set up well as a leader to effectively manage interactions over time. Are you creating some deliberate moments of connection with individual members on the team yourself and between members on the team? What's your strategy for managing constructive conflict? What process will you use for decision-making in your virtual environment? And how will you stress good differences rather than focusing solely on commonalities? We don't want to lose the specialness of what makes us great as individuals while we try so hard to keep together as a team in a virtual construct. The L in SPLIT refers to language. Even if everyone speaks the same regional language, every team has a code of its own. Is everyone fluent in your shorthand or jargon? Are newer or more dispersed team members at a disadvantage? You want to be sure that, again, you're setting up the guardrails and raising the level of awareness so that everyone's on the same page. I in SPLIT refers to identity, and this refers to self-definitions and the leader's approach in helping the team to accept ambiguity, suspend judgment, get comfortable in discomfort, and learn and teach one another. At this time, you want to do anything you can to enable individuals to express and share both collective and personal identity. This can start easily with simple rituals on each call, a process for turn-taking, or even creating a virtual water cooler or tip site where people are able to share their own perspective in very personal ways. Lastly, the T, technology. And technology comes up, obviously, a lot whenever we're talking about virtual work. But it really is encouraging you, the SPLIT framework, to go back to number 2 and really think about that range of technologies. How is the team communicating? What tools are we gravitating towards? Are they what we set out at the start to use? What's missing from our mix? Is there anything we can add over time? As these situations evolve, technologies do too. Don't be afraid to try something new instead of getting stuck in something that's not working. Another piece in bridging social distance, and maybe the most critical of all, is to think about trust. Now, many of the principles for building trust on a virtual team are similar to building trust on an in-person team. But be on the lookout particularly for those small things that loom large and can have an even bigger impact when we don't get together face-to-face. Breaking virtual team trust is a lot easier. If people miss deadlines, if they're not answering our communications, or we feel like they're maintaining silence or a little aloof, or maybe if we feel like someone's micromanaging us from afar, well, it feels a lot worse when we can't get together in a room, shut the door, and have it out a little bit. So pay attention to those small pieces, little bits of small actions and interactions that can help us to build our trust and the things that we do that might be unintentionally eroding it. Finally, building on the nuts and bolts of SPLIT, there's some underlying conditions that must be present to make virtual teaming work. Research suggests among the most important is the same online or in person, making it safe to team. Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson first identified the concept of psychological safety in work teams way back in 1999. Since then, she's observed how companies with a trusting workplace perform better. Psychological safety isn't about being nice, she says. It's about giving candid feedback, openly admitting mistakes, and learning from each other. And she argues the kind of organizational culture that psychological safety creates is increasingly important in the world in which we work in today. If you've been leading teams for any length of time, you've probably heard about this concept, but it's a little trickier to achieve in a virtual context. Some strategies that work for leaders and members of virtual teams alike: you can clarify intent and proactively invite input. Explain what's behind assertions and decisions, and formally invite people to disagree, build on, or offer feedback. One easy way to do it is to invite input by acknowledging that you know you don't have all the answers and that you could really use the team's help. If you're the leader, you can also acknowledge your own fallibility, and you can sponsor the notion of angels advocacy on your team. Devil's advocates work fine in face-to-face environments, but when we're missing body language and even tone virtually, it's easy to misperceive a constructive challenge as a personal threat. Angels advocacy is a little different because it involves what-if thinking and how might we questions in place of taking contrary positions. And ultimately, it allows us to explore what's possible together instead of driving each other apart. Leading with curiosity can help people think differently and think together. So if your team is prone to judgment and blame, try what if, yes and, simple tools you can use, and shifts in everyday language. Finally, this last point on intentionally creating these connections is essential, and it happens in small and everyday ways. One recommendation that comes from the geniuses leading the Tech Behind TED Talks is to use your standard meetings to build and incorporate some team-wide traditions. And this picture that I'm going to share with you now is one of their favorites and mine too. On the TED team's standard virtual meeting on launch days, they all wear hats. And you can see here the hats can get pretty crazy, but it's a great way to build in some of those split principles on identity. It leverages the simplicity of available technologies, and those rituals are part of their guardrails and the special way they have of working. It also speaks to some of their superpowers and the way that they want to work together. So in a really simple way, they've incorporated actually all 5 of our lessons. Another team I know starts their weekly meeting with one person each week sharing the coolest thing they've seen that week. And another lets each person post the meme of how they're feeling that day, with appropriate guardrails, of course, for meme posting. There's no one right way to do it, but these small but important relational connections can go a long way to creating the conditions for trust. So, across all 5 of these lessons, there you have it. And across the 5, if I could leave you with perhaps just some really important points from my personal perspective. Can't stress enough how important it is to create structure and establish agreed protocols as early as you can in the process, but not be afraid to revisit them over time if it seems like they're not working. Try very hard to mix your media and use the right medium for each of your messages or tasks. Try to mix a balance of those lean and rich in terms of both information sharing and relationship building technologies into your mix. Create rituals and maintain personal connections. We can't lose sight that at the very end of the day, we are a team. And if we work for an organization, we are connected by shared values, shared principles. So we already have a head start. If we've been working together a long time, there's already something that makes us special. Let's lean back on it and bring it into our virtual world. Communicate more than you think you have to at the start, particularly if you're a leader, but give your team the space to tell you when too much is too much, and recognize that it might be different for each person on your team. And then give frequent recognition for accomplishments that happen along the way. Celebrate team and individual success, even when there is so much going on that's distracting and difficult right now. There are great examples of kindness, of people doing extra and more than, and actually making amazing things happen in the face of adversity. Make the time for that whenever you can. So last moment here for you as well when it comes to making the time, just jot down what's important to you. And maybe pick one thing out of all of these things that you'd like to take back and use or share with your team to make use of this lesson. Now, if we didn't cover something you wanted to cover, or you want to do a deeper dive in any one of these lessons or any of the related elements, here are some additional assets that you can access, free use, online. And then if you want to go deeper or get more specific, I would encourage you to contact your relationship manager to explore additional resources and opportunities, particularly if you do want some additional assistance for your team or if you would like to access any of the assets that are not free use. So with that, I want to say thank you for your time and attention. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being part of this virtual session. Be safe. Take care. Bye for now.